All right, ladies and gentlemen, today I've got somebody that I'm really excited to share with you. This is Brian Fennessy. He is out of the Orange County Fire Authority. And Brian and I talked a couple different times several months ago. And Brian, I mean, just being as honest as I can be, one of the neatest guys. I just love your presence and your character. I'm excited to hear about your fire service stuff, but I'm more excited for people to meet you as a person and kind of hear some of your perspectives and just see the kind of the quality of your character. So love having you on here today. So super. Tell me right away, just tell me you're with Orange County Fire Authority, which is a little different than a normal fire department. So tell me a little bit about Orange County.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mike. I mean, what a generous introduction. Thanks. I've enjoyed our conversations as well, and I think I've gotten something out of them, even personally.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's tough, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But to have others that you can share with, is it gets harder the more you move up in rank in these organizations. But yeah, the Orange County Fire Authority is really a kind of a fascinating story. It's from a population perspective, we're the second largest county behind Los Angeles County in California. The Orange County Fire Authority serves about 2 million, population of 2 million out of nearly 80 fire stations. And it goes back, Orange County, oh gosh, probably even 30 years plus was not nearly as populous or urbanized. And up until 1980, it was a ranger unit for the California Department of Forestry, or CDF, now called CAL FIRE.
Okay.
1980, and cities were popping up throughout Orange County, incorporating and such, and urbanizing. And in 1980, the decision was made for the county of Orange to create this fire department to better serve the citizens in the county, and it was growing leaps and bounds. Well, it continued to grow leaps and bounds, and by 1995, there were many other cities, and they just didn't feel like the county of Orange is really providing the services that they need, and so they created this Joint Powers Authority. So back then, and even today, there were some core cities, and it was the county, the unincorporated area of Orange that we serve, and 16 cities at the time in 1995. Since then, we've added 7 more cities. And as it stands, we provide full fire department services for the county and 23 incorporated cities. Some very large cities, some that are 300 plus thousand, and we've even got one that I believe is right around 10,000, and everything in between.
Is the fire authority concept, is that something that you see throughout the US, or is that relatively unique?
I think one of the things that probably primarily makes it different than, say, a fire protection district, I mean, it operates pretty much like a fire protection district, but instead of elected board members 8, 9, 7, it depends on the size of the district, people are elected to serve as board directors. Here, each city has either their mayor or one of their city council members serve as a board director. And we have 2 of the 5 county board supervisors. So I've got 25 bosses.
Oh my goodness.
So I answer to a board of 25 elected officials, again, a rep from all 23 cities, one of the councilmen or the mayor. And so that's really what sets it apart, I think, is how its governance is structured. There's no larger district fire department in the United States, maybe, I don't know, maybe in the world, but 25 bosses, is
That's crazy.
quite different. When you stand there at our board meeting and you're looking across this dais at 25, it's something.
So you said you have 80 stations, but how many, what's your personnel numbers look like?
We're including non-sworn staff, we're right around 1,800. And so we probably got between 12 and 13 on the floor. We operate a variety of different, we've got, hazmat teams. We're one of the 28. We have one of the 28 FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Task Forces. These are the teams that respond all over the country and statewide. We operate bulldozers, hand crews, for our wildfire mission. I've got 5 aircraft, one 3,000 gallon Chinook that we
Those
drop.
USAR teams, you guys will drop in like at different national events, right? I mean, the USAR
Oh
team
yeah,
is just regional to you guys, but I mean, you guys will pop in at all kinds of events.
right. I mean, and we're on a rotation, and so it's not unusual for us to respond to hurricanes and
Yeah.
everything. But so we've got all the toys and the different anything you can imagine. We've got. We don't do scuba and things like that, or ice diving or anything like that.
Yeah.
but,
I've got a
but
buddy
yeah,
named I got a buddy named Ray that's up. I think he said north of San Francisco at River City. River City, I think is the name of it. And he was telling me they do some of the water stuff. And he said that's a whole nother thing in fire when you start putting boats in the water and scuba and everything else. So
yeah,
well,
we don't do the scuba, but we do the swiftwater rescue, and
yeah.
we're one of the teams that'll end up. We spent time up north this year when it rained and there were floods, and so
Yeah.
a pretty large department that way.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your career. Like, where did you get started and how long you been chief, that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, I grew up in the LA area, a little part of the unincorporated county of Los Angeles, little town called Altadena, which is just north of Pasadena, and everybody's seen the Rose Parade, the Rose Bowl, and all that. So pretty close there. One had four other brothers. There were five of us, and didn't necessarily. I was not a standout in school, but I did okay in athletics and accountability. Certainly wasn't then what it is now. Went to a large high school, John Muir High School in Pasadena. Several thousand went there, and let's just say they wasn't necessarily focused on grades at the time, maybe more so on athletics. So when I graduated high school, I didn't have a lot of options. I had maybe the military. I had potentially jail, and I'm only
I love
half
that that's a
kidding,
potential. You're like, well, that was one of them.
right? I mean, I'm only half kidding. I had kind of a life kind of. And my dad was served in World War II in the Pacific. South Pacific Theater, and was a corpsman, and was on all the beaches, and his leadership style was very autonomous and do as I say. And I
I
think,
was raised by a Vietnam vet, so I'm right there with you, buddy.
right. And so you did what you were told. If not, there are consequences. Very different. And he made it clear that, you either got a job or you're going to school or you're paying rent or you're out. And I didn't have a lot of options. So a few days out of high school, I went to the unemployment office, and one of the individuals there running it said, had you ever thought about becoming a firefighter? And I had a couple uncles that were firefighters for Los Angeles, but hadn't really thought about it. And he says, look, show up at Oak Grove Ranger Station. They're near La Cañada, Flint Ridge, kind of where JPL is, and they'll issue you some boots and they'll put you on a crew. And sounded good to me. And so next thing I know, I'm showing up and I'm working for the Oak Grove Hotshots. I'm working for the U.S. Forest Service, and they're putting the crews. We're traveling all over the Western United States. I'd never really been out of the LA area. And as an 18-year-old kid, it was me and one other. The rest of them were the old guys. They were 21, 22, 23. A lot of them had come out of Southeast Asia, because the veterans back then, coming out of Vietnam, had a veterans preference, and were getting many of the federal civilian jobs. So a lot to learn and there. So I loved it. Go figure. And
so your first exposure to the fire service personally was doing hotshot work. I mean, that's wild.
Yeah, no, 18 years old, and at the time, my goal in life was to be the guy running that chainsaw at the front.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. It's like, man, that is my goal in life. I don't want to be swinging a tool back here in the line. I want to run that. I want to run that noisy tool up front. And then from there, it was like, well, I'd like to be a squad boss, and then ultimately a crew superintendent and running the 20 person crew. And I got to do all those things. And over the course of 13 years, and my uncles in LA were encouraging me to, hey, you probably, the benefits and other things, you need to start applying for other fire departments. I saw being a superintendent, that thing is my career. I'm an old guy at 31, 32. And so I applied, and the city of San Diego hired me in 1990. So I left all that behind and became a firefighter with the San Diego City Fire Department. And after a few years, kind of recognized that, we didn't have, the aviation resources that you do in LA. And as a firefighter, I got the fire chief's attention and others and created an aviation over the course of a few years. And
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
in 19, yeah, we had some big fires. And anyway, so it kind of helped my career kind of move forward. I spent 10 years as a firefighter in San Diego, and I always felt like, I needed to learn this job really well if I was going to promote, if I had to lead others into, tough, hostile environments. I wanted to at least have as much experience as I could,
Yeah.
falling through smoky hallways, whatever it was, and worked in the busiest stations. I mean, that was kind of hotshot crews, busy stations. I kind of had ADD as a kid, and kind of, adrenaline junkie. Man,
Yeah.
I'd go nuts somewhere else, and promoted up. And in 2015 was appointed the fire chief by the mayor of the city of San Diego. Spent 3 years as the fire chief there, and unexpectedly, the fire chief job opened up here in Orange County. And I was perfectly happy in San Diego, and we were doing amazing things. And but Orange County really represented a big challenge, a little bit bigger than San Diego City Fire Department, but they had a lot of problems up here. They had a very public war with the sheriff and their aviation unit. Had a fire recently that burned a bunch of homes where the Orange County Fire did not respond appropriately. We're looking at losing a couple cities, and I'm kind of attracted,
Yeah.
to problems, and they certainly had those. And I lived in North County, San Diego, so moving to Orange County, moving 30 minutes away wasn't a big deal. I just looked at it as a challenge. And so I've been here, I'm in my 6th year now. So I've been a fire chief a little better than 8 years.
Yeah.
And here we are.
What's been your favorite thing about moving to Orange County? What's one of the things that you really liked?
I didn't know what I would like, obviously, and didn't. And one of the things, obviously, that, when you grow up in a fire department, did nearly 30 years in San Diego, you kind of know where all the bodies are buried, and you have all the history and this and that. You go to a larger, even metro department, and I knew some people, but you don't have that network of folks you can trust. So you got to reestablish that, right? And I think for me, having that wildfire background, addition, we had aircraft obviously in San Diego. We brought that into it. A much more robust wildfire program. Again, bulldozers, hand crews, helicopters, and fixed wing. Well, I brought fixed wing here, and so the wildfire program here had shrunk since its Cal Fire days. A lot of that because of the recession and where cuts were made. And so one of the priorities I had here was to build that back up, because
Well, that had to be kind of fun, especially with your beginnings where they were.
yeah, it was it was a great fit. And I say it often here, and I think in Colorado Springs, where you are, you get it too. Is yeah, earthquakes are a big concern out here, but day to day, there is no greater danger to life and property or threat than wildfire.
Oh man, absolutely. They move so fast.
It moves so fast. Colorado, you all have experienced tremendous fires, even out in Colorado Springs. What, 8, 10 years ago,
Yeah,
whatever.
Waldo Canyon, man. They
Yeah,
just ate some stuff up. Black Forest. I mean, we had a
yeah.
couple.
So, that continues to be probably our biggest threat. So kind of in my, I did the metro and the urban cities and big cities. So I really feel like, got some pretty good, a pretty good background for this. So I didn't know I'd like it so much here, but I really do. I love the people, and just getting used to a different culture, and then working to change, the operational culture was something that was really important to me. And I had 15 years to do that, between being the number 2 for a long time before I was the number 1, in changing, what we call the mission-driven culture. And so I brought that here. And as trying to change or culture is not an easy thing, and it's not fast.
No, I was just talking to a chief the other day. He's about 3.5 years into changing the culture, and he's really frustrated. And I said, you need to understand. I said, the honeymoon can last anywhere from about 18 months to about 36 months. So from 36 months to about 7, 8 years, that's where the real change happens. Because that's the fight, that's the battle, that's all that. So it's interesting where you're at in that process, right? Where you're probably seeing some of those things take place, but you're still kind of like, hey, no, we're serious about this. This is who we will be.
Yeah.
They'll tolerate that for a couple of years, and then they try it out on 3 or 4, where they're like, how serious are you? And you're like, no, we're going to stand right here. It's tough.
Yeah, we're a little bit over the hump in many ways. We just got done and are about to, just within the next week or so, after it's taken us, 3 or 4 years to have our doctrine completely, done over, and to have those that are important, the core group, believe in them. You can't have a fire chief come in and go, look, this way we're going to do, the way the culture is going to be, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, they have to buy into it, own it,
Yeah.
hold each other accountable
I think
to.
culture is fascinating to me because it's shared. I mean, like I always think the executive leader, you have to come with, this is where we're going, this is what we want. But if there's not an opening for other people to have ownership in it, it just doesn't work. And yet trying to find that balance between, hey, there's ownership and yet there's some non-negotiables. We are going here, we are doing this. That balance is what I think makes a really good chief, a really good executive, is to be able to do both.
It was really challenging. When I got here, like I said, there were some pretty significant issues, some of them very public. And again, I got 25 new bosses with expectations, right? And there were some, like any organization, some really good folks in leadership positions, but others that probably weren't. And, not through me, firing anybody or anything like that. Others eventually figured it out within the first year, this is where we're going. And it wasn't for everybody. And so some people retired, uh, some people demoted. And I think, and I share this sometimes with people, that, there's at least I see three types of people. Those you can figure out pretty quick, right? That you kind of know. And then those that take maybe a little bit more time, But man, there were a few that it took me a good year to really see who they were. I was fooled, and when asked, and now that I have, good, trusted folks, why didn't anybody, they said, you need to figure that out for yourself, chief. So, and they just watched us. And in one case, what I found was people loved where we were going, the mission driven culture, all that stuff. But because one of my executive leaders had this history that was less than positive, I'll just say that, they were like, the word in the street was like, because the chief, really, we like what he's saying, but he's got this guy.
Right.
It's like, and so do we believe him, or doesn't he know?
I'm absolutely fascinated. I love this point you're bringing up because I think a lot of execs miss it. Is I had a guy tell me once, he says, you have the culture you're willing to tolerate. And he said, what you're willing to tolerate, other people are paying attention to. And he said, so when you don't address that, either don't know or don't address that person on your team who is kind of resistant or is kind of on the side, and you think, well, and this is the theory I used to always hear, well, go forward and they'll catch up. But everybody else is going, why are they not on board? And why are you okay with it? And so actually having the courage to go, hey, we're going to deal with this no matter what the outcome is. Like, tell me where you're at. Are you bought in or not? We think sometimes we can move past it, but man, you just got to face it. And I love that, right? As you face it, then everyone else buys in. Until you face it, they're all like, but wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And I mean, this was a little bit different in that I love this guy.
Yeah.
This guy had me completely, I mean, I thought he was funny. He got after it. He did this and that. What I didn't realize, that was just what he was showing me.
Yeah.
And the others had all known him through their history. And he was in a position when I got here that the chief before me had promoted him, and everybody thought that. I didn't know. So what everybody else knew, I didn't know, and nobody told me.
Right.
And so after, there was a leadership moment that he failed miserably in, and, had to discuss with him that, I was going to have to look at reassigning him somewhere else. I asked those around me that later, that we'd gotten that high trust state, is like, why didn't you or anybody else ever say anything to me?
Yeah.
And they're like, chief wasn't going to say, you're the chief. I mean, you had to figure this out yourself. I says, yeah. But at the meantime, just him being on staff made me, I finally took somebody to tell me, they go, hey, look, you're number 2 or number 3. So yeah, he's not helping you. It's like, well, what are you talking about? Is it, well, from a reputation, credibility, all these other things, history. I was blown away. And this was close to a year in.
Yeah.
And so I'd been completely fooled. Probably like you, I think we all like to think that we are pretty good judges of people and character. And I think by and large, we're pretty good. But man, I missed this. I completely missed it. And
when I was working on my master's, I took a class on decision making and judgment. And from a research standpoint, they said in general, people are wrong 70% of the time. And I just remember thinking, not me. I'm a different kind of leader. And then as I went through the research, I was like, we're probably at a we probably don't discern at the rate we think we do. I think a lot
Yeah.
of us are good at discernment, but there's some things you can just never know, right? I mean, because you probably didn't have the details and the information, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always mindful of that. Like, I'm probably not as good at decision making as I'm convinced I am.
Yeah. And coming in again with all the issues, I ended up working with a company that worked with us in San Diego on what we call in the business the standards of cover, really kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
looking at data and how is our response? Because number one, I think our business is our core business. Number one is our service delivery. It's
yeah.
engines. It's really simple. I think people try to in the fire service and probably in other places make it look so complicated and complex and
Right.
you got to be really smart to do this. Trust me, if I'm doing it, you don't got to have a whole wall full of degrees or behind your name a whole bunch of letters and numbers. Pretty simple that way, but it's really engines, ambulances, and trucks,
Yeah.
and everything else that happens within the fire department supports those people that are sitting in those fire stations on those engines, ambulances, and trucks. That includes me, that includes my staff, that includes hazmat, helicopters, you name it, HR, you name any function within a fire department. But what you see many times is these other areas that believe they are the most important or should
Oh,
require
yeah.
those priority, and things get and people have to be reminded sometimes, look, you're great at what you do in your department, whatever, but how's that affecting our service delivery?
Right.
Doing those things. You may not ever ride on a fire truck, but what you're doing to payroll, whatever it is,
Yeah.
day to day is supporting those firefighters.
I love that though, remembering too that, it's about what's happening on the line. It's not necessarily all the other stuff. Cause man, I see departments, both police and fire, where it's all about recruitment. It's all about community engagement. It's all about, and they have all these things. And at the end of the day, you're like, man, it's all about the service that the person in the truck, on the truck, in the car, that they can give in that moment. And you're like, we're doing this over here in the community. Super. But if this isn't healthy and functioning really, really well, none of that other stuff's going to matter in the long run.
I completely agree. And I'm trying to remember, the founder of Southwest Airlines. Remember the funny guy, the advertisements who you get on and back in the early days when I'm blanking on his name, but there's great YouTube videos of him talking, Gallagher. Anyways, and his thing was, I remember seeing it a number of years ago, one of his leadership or was on his talk, and his focus at Southwest was, we grew up in this culture of, the customer is number one, the customer is always right, this and that. And his thing with Southwest Airlines was, no, our people are number one.
Yeah.
And that's our deal. And if we treat our people and we make our employees and our people number one and we care for them, they're going to deliver a better service to our
Oh,
customers.
absolutely.
And I'd never really thought about it that way, right? And
Yeah.
so I was dumb enough, I think, when I was talking with the mayor in San Diego, they were looking at me as their fire chief, right? And in the succession plan, the fire chief that served 6 years before me really did a good job of setting it up. So I'm with the mayor going through one of these, wasn't even an interview, it was a series of, getting together, making sure we were fit. And we kind of knew we were. And I threw that out there. I said, listen, you probably don't hear this much, but the citizens, they're not our, number one,
Yeah.
Focus. And
That
his
was like
eyes got,
the
his
shock on
eyes
people's
got
faces.
real big, right? His chief of staff is looking, and I realized that maybe that was something I shouldn't have brought, right? And I said, well, let me clarify what I mean by that. And I said that, and then I saw the nodding heads, but
Yeah.
it's just not something that I think, sometimes people realize, and sometimes we got to narrow it down so it is simple.
Yeah.
It's
You
easy.
take care of your people and your people will take care of everybody else. If you take
Yeah.
care of everybody else, there's nobody left to take care of your people,
Yeah. And so, it's taken me, probably took me probably 3.5, 4 years to get the right pieces in place here, at least certainly at the executive
Yeah.
team level, to where now, there's laughter upstairs. There's, people poking fun with each other at the highest levels. And, at a staff, I said this at the staff meeting on Wednesday, it's great to be a part of a team where nobody is reluctant to share, anything, a different opinion,
Yeah.
to tell the chief, hey, maybe that's a bad
But
idea.
you built a really good team when ego isn't the thing that's leading it.
Yep.
And like you said, I think humor shows safety. When you
Yeah,
have real humor, what you have is a group of people that's going, hey, I feel safe enough to be me. And then, man, you could do all kinds of great things then.
I agree. And it took a while though, because they've suffered here through chiefs that were very, I think, heavy-handed and dealt
Yeah.
very strongly. And I've dealt with those people. I'm sure you have over your career, and you try to help them, but if they don't want to help, it's like, man, let them go on their own there. If they don't really want to know,
Yeah.
or they say they want to know what they don't, well, I'm okay. You're on your own.
Yeah.
And one of the
I,
things I told people here is, man, do not let me, because I tend to be forward leaning and high risk in
yeah.
terms of, some of the initiatives and things we do. Start with yes and then kind of work to no. And I need people around me. They're going to say, hey, Chief, have you thought about it this way? Or have you done, this?
Right.
Because, I tell them, don't let me drive off the cliff. And everybody will tell you that.
Yeah.
I got here, but there was one guy, at least when I got here, who would say, Chief, this is kind of and I appreciated him so much. I think he was a
Yeah.
battalion chief at the time. I promoted him up, and before he retired, he was my number two. But this was a guy I could count on.
Yeah.
Tell me, maybe that's not the greatest idea, and here's why. Now
I
I've got a
always
room
told
full of
people, I'm
people.
like, love me enough to tell me the truth because you're not loving me if you withhold something from me. Like, I mean, if I'm blowing it, you love me enough. I've actually I had a guy on my staff once, and he's like, I really like what you're saying to me right now. And I said, that's okay. I said, I love you enough to say it. I said, there's a bunch of people around you who won't say it because they care more about you liking them than your health. And I said, I'm just going to speak right to it. I had a guy yesterday, I was doing an interview that's going to come out right before yours does in August. And he had this saying that I actually thought was brilliant. He said, I've learned in life, he's been a CEO of all these like multi-million dollar companies. And he said, I've learned in life, the more I insist, the more people resist. And he said, so in my
Hmm.
whole leadership journey, he said, I realized it's okay for me to have an opinion. It's okay for me to lead. But when I switch over to demanding, he goes, they just lock up and resist. And he said, so in my leadership, he said, I constantly remind myself, if I'm insisting, they're resisting, and if they're resisting, I may be insisting too much. And so he's like, then I go back and I look at, hey, how can I do this differently? And he said that, and I was like, oh my goodness, dude, that's brilliant. It's simple, it's
That
remember,
is good.
but brilliant.
I like the way that sounds too. And, I haven't had to, and maybe others would disagree here, but very often you insist. And if it was because of, something that, whether it's a cancer, awareness and
Yeah,
prevention,
and there are times that you do have to insist.
yeah, when it's better for that for mental behavior, whatever it is we're
Yeah,
doing because, it's going to benefit and they find ways. But even one of my number twos on the support side yesterday says, the conversation we had staff and made me nervous. And I told her because she's brilliant. I said, when you're nervous, that makes me nervous. And
yeah,
so let's talk. I want to hear that.
yeah,
And, we've kind of had to pump the brake pedal a little bit because, as I'll tell you in San Diego, I wouldn't say they were glad to see me go, but the executive team knew the pace was, and they were warning the folks up here, the pace is going to be fast.
yeah.
He doesn't, he doesn't rest much. And so, but I
I
mess with
love that, dude. I think it's why we resonate with each other. I took a job once, and when I got there, I finally got on scene after all the interviews and everything. And one of the leaders said, I told these people if they hired you to buckle up because it is going to be a wild, fast, crazy ride. And I'm thinking, oh, that's why Brian and I get along, man. We're cut from the same cloth.
That's pretty much exactly what they said. But I mess with people too, right? They'll they heard that down south. It's like, man, the dude never sleeps, man. You'll get paid, you'll get emails and text messages. And I think the legend becomes more than it was because
Oh,
that
yeah.
wasn't necessarily true. But to kind of when I got here to kind of do that, when you get my age, sometimes you get up a few times at night to, use the bathroom. So
Yeah.
I would take that, and I'd have my phone or something with me, and I'm sitting there, of course, and I'm looking, there was a text. I'd answer a text at 2 in the morning
Just to
or
jack with him.
1:30. And all of a sudden the guys, when you're the new chief, it's like, God dang, man, the new chief answered a freaking text or email at 2:30 in the morning. And so it just kind of perpetuated this his never sleeps thing. It's like, no, man, I try to get about 6 hours a night, but
I love, you're like, I get a solid 6. It reminds me of the movie Elf. Like,
yeah.
hey, did you sleep well? Yeah, I got a solid 45 minutes and I built this rocket ship. So, well,
I,
so tell me this. What are a couple things? And I want to get into some leadership stuff because I really
okay.
respect your view of leadership. I think it's very attainable and approachable. I think it's brilliant, but I also think you're not way up here in these like philosophical realms. You're just like a really tactical, practical leader. It's really good. But before we do that, what are a couple things the fire service has taught you just in life that you're like, hey, here's a couple important lessons I've learned by being a part of the fire service?
Well, it goes a long ways back, and I don't think you intellectualize it or realize it when it's happening. Now that I'm obviously in the twilight of my career, I can kind of look back and it's the same. I think outside the fire service, some of us are, I don't know. I don't know that I'm a perfectionist. I'm good with like 70, 80%, right? But not always. It wasn't like that, right? And so what I've learned with the fire service, especially operationally, man, you don't have the luxury when you're making decisions of that 100% information. So you have to get good at picking pieces really quick, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, and then make a decision. And sometimes you get it wrong.
Yeah.
But and one of the things we talk about here a lot is, we talk a lot about disciplined initiative, that, hey, if you know what the intent is, if we've given you good leaders, commanders' intent, and you're operating within that, and there are times you need to make a decision because of time sensitivity, the gravity of what it is, and it may be outside of policy or procedure, the expectation is you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And people, I think, like that. But then the follow-up is, okay, Chief, I do that, but what if the decision is wrong or it turns out that the results become negative? Do you still got my back?
Yeah.
We have to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, when we ask you about it, okay, tell me what you were thinking, what the situation was. Don't take this as, well, now you're second guessing me. No,
Right.
There's a level of accountability that comes with that. We want you not to feel so hemmed in through this rules-based.
I love it though, right? Because what you're saying is an educated mistake is okay, an impulsive mistake's not.
Yeah.
And so, hey, if you have a reason for your mistake, I'm all about it. Just don't make the same one multiple times.
Exactly.
If you have a reason, but if you're just being impulsive and just I don't want to wait for it, that's different. And so I love that distinction.
Well, if we don't have, and I think it's the same, not just in the emergency services, but I'm sure it's the same in business and other things. Well, what I'm finding is, at least in my position, the time sensitivity isn't, the risk involved isn't the same. When you're out on a fire engine or a paramedic, whatever it is, man, lives are, you better make that decision, because if you've delayed it, and worse, if the culture is such that you're afraid to make that decision because we work within this rules-based culture, I'm afraid I'm going to get disciplined. I'm afraid I'm going to be wrong. I'm going to be late, and you don't do what needs to be done. We're more, this compliance-based or rules-based culture. We're living, at least here in this mission-driven culture that we've established, an intent-based, culture where we want you to make, and it doesn't matter if you're a firefighter or a captain, whatever rank it is, if it's in front of you, time sensitive, do it.
Yeah.
And I think early in my career, nobody wants to make mistakes, right? And so it takes a while to get all that information, and we don't have the luxury of time when you're out there. So I think it helped as I moved into, the exact middle management and then into the executive level, is the triaging of information very quickly. I kind of get to where I think I need to be faster than the people. But sometimes that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Because then you stop listening. All of a sudden you've gotten there.
Yeah.
And the people talking to you or the person talking to you isn't done. And I have to tell myself, let them finish.
Yeah.
Listen.
The way that I've had to do it in my own life, so I can make decisions quick. And so I have had to train myself to slow down. I normally surround myself with a team of people who makes decisions slow, and I have to challenge them to speed up. And so I always tell them, if they're the slow person and they're uncomfortable, we're probably in good shape. If it's really fast and I'm happy, we're probably in bad shape, because I'm like, hey, we made a decision, 5 minutes, let's go. And so what I've learned is that idea that people who just know themselves and go, I like to go quick, slow down. People who go, I need a million answers. And you said it earlier, and I love it, right? Sometimes 70, 80% is enough. The next 15, 20%, you're not going to get anything new. You don't have that luxury. So figuring out on your teams, hey, what is your tendency? And just say, be aware of your tendency.
Yeah.
And the other thing I love, and you guys are doing this, and it's because you're taking the time to do it. Rules are easy because they expedite action. But rules don't mean that people get it. They don't get the culture. They don't. And to take the time to say, no, I want you to know what we're about and how we do things, what our values are, that kind of stuff, then you can make any decision in the field you need to, because you know how we're thinking, commander's intent, right? as opposed to you see some departments, some organizations, and it's all about we're trying to get to 100% compliance. I
Yeah,
don't want 100% compliance. If I can get 100% understanding and values commitment, yeah, man, because there are times not to comply that you're going, oh, this
that's right.
situation was a little different. So I love that you guys are taking the time. And you even said earlier, hey, it's taken us 3 years, 4 years to really get all of this in place. I see organizations all the time. It's, hey, we have 30 days. We're going to figure out our mission, vision, values, and strategy. And I'm
Right.
like, no, you're not. You're just
Yeah,
a mess.
that's tough, and I mean, when I got here, I inherited a document that was called the Orange County Way or something. It was really kind of done by the chief here back 20 years ago. And it was a takeoff off of what Chief Brunacini did in Phoenix. And
Yeah.
did some really innovative things when he was the chief there. It was all about, values and principles and those, and I loved it, but it needed a little bit of a refresh.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and so we've done that. It's the OCFA way now. So it really is a document that speaks to who we are. Now, the operational doctrine or the organizational doctrine that we just finished really speaks to how we make decisions. And, in that broader intent and really letting our people feel like they do have, especially on the front lines, you know, the risk, right? The risk I've got day to day, my risk is political risk,
Right.
media, all these things. And so sometimes it's big, but it's not like risk when you're on that engine. If I don't do something now, somebody's going to get hurt or killed,
Right.
right?
Right.
Do I go in? And so sometimes, well, not sometimes, but I really try to be cognizant about the hills I die on.
Yeah.
Is this, how big a deal is it? Sometimes I got to ask myself when I start to feel that in my gut that this is really bothering me. Is it bothering me because, is it my ego because I'm the chief and how dare them or
Yeah.
whatever else? Is it because it's wrong? I find maybe it's just an age thing, I don't know, or maturity thing, but a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah.
Because many times the things you worry about, I found at night or that really cause you to lose sleep in the morning is not a big deal.
Yeah.
And maybe isn't even spoken about later, but it is. In our world, it's all about risk. What is the risk here? Is there risk, even if it's not somebody's going to get hurt, killed, whatever? Well, then maybe we have a little more time. How do we approach a problem because this city or somebody has said something, the media said something bad about us? Do we? And so it's more strategic and calculating, whereas on the front lines, where I was maybe, and probably people are comfortable, is, boom, 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 especially when you get
Yeah.
time.
This is funny. The application that my wife and I just went through this in the last week where we were having this conflict. We were trying to, and it felt big. I mean, it felt so big.
Right.
And you talked about the idea of self-reflection. I started going, why do I feel the way I feel?
Yeah.
And what I realized was, oh, I wanted my way. And of course I could justify it a million ways to Sunday. I'm like, no, 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 no. And so as we were fleshing it out and having the conversation, I said, oh, I'm realizing that I have to distinguish if it's a preference or a need. I need to fight for needs. I need to be very careful about fighting over my preferences. I said, but in the moment, they feel the same.
Yeah.
So unless I self-reflect to go, what am I really feeling right now? Then I'll make mistakes because I'll make everything a need. No, we
Yeah.
need this, and going, nah, some of the things I need are just my preference. And then when I can delineate that, oh man, then I can say, you know what, for a need, I'll fight you. For a preference, I'll sacrifice for you. That kind of difference, man, that was so profound for me and instantly diffused that whole situation where then it's like, oh, my wife likes me again. But it's exactly what you were talking about.
Well, man, you hit the nail on the head, Michael. I mean, the whole, why is this bothering me so much? And then really getting honest with yourself. And sometimes it is ego. I had somebody tell me the other day, came in here and he gave, hey, one of the, I don't know, it was a captain. I know the guy that called you by your first name. He says, man, that was so disrespectful. I says, why? He goes, well, you're the chief. I said, look, man, I get it, but those kind of things, I mean, I'm not going to ever react to it because I've seen though people do that in my
Oh
career.
yeah.
Hey, you call me chief from now on, especially you get promoted. You don't call, well, what do you think the rest of us do? Right?
Oh,
Go, oh,
dude,
okay, this is
I
the
was a
way.
preacher for 30 years. And I had guys that were like, you will all call me pastor. And I actually saw people who make their kids in their home call him pastor. And I thought it was ridiculous. I would tell people, they're like,
Crazy.
what do you want me to call you? I was like, my name's Mike. And like, but what do I call you? I was like, well, Mike or Michael works. I was like, either one of those work. And because my thing is like, all that stuff's silliness. Like, is there a respect? Yeah, in the right situation, right time, absolutely. But to get all fired up about it,
Oh
and
God,
if that's what you're putting your standard of appreciation on, then you haven't done your job. You should do such a great job. You call me whatever you want to call me. If you need to be
I
called
agree.
something, man, you know,
It's just a reflection I've learned over time. It's an insecurity, and
absolutely,
generally what
absolutely,
I've seen, and because I try to be a good student of human behavior and all that. If somebody is carrying that giant ego, it's really a reflection of the amount of insecurity
yep,
they actually have.
yep,
Because end of the day, really, who cares, right? I mean, I introduce myself. I don't introduce myself as Chief Fennessy. Now, I may sign on the frickin' email, but if I'm being introduced somewhere,
yeah,
hi, I'm Brian Fennessy. Now they may say Chief or whatever, but I don't get wrapped up around that.
yeah.
But some
That's all silly.
people, I mean, little silly stuff like that, people really do, and it's just mind-boggling.
I think you're right though. The bigger that ego, the lower the security that you have personally, or you wouldn't need it. You'd be like, hey,
Yeah,
you don't need to know this about me. So
no, I agree. So, I mean, there's just so many lessons. I think they're life lessons, and as it,
yeah.
um,
What are some of the, because I want to shift in a minute because I want to really kind of dig into some of your leadership lessons. But what are a couple innovations or strategies you've seen in the fire service that you've been really proud of and that you think more people need to be aware of? So like I asked this question to a chief recently, and he was telling me there's this whole new system where when the tones go off at night, they go off depending on which unit you are, which room it is, and how the lights come up and how. And he's explaining this whole thing, and I'm fascinated. I'm like, what a cool strategy. But what are a couple innovations you've seen in the fire service that you're like, I wish more people knew about this?
well, yeah, it's changing rapidly. And you're right. I mean, we've got that same thing. We're going through a whole station alerting thing, and
Yeah.
they want the lights to come dim here because if it's just the engine crew, the truck crew wants to stay
Which is,
asleep.
I'm like, oh my goodness, it's brilliant.
Well, and there's studies out there now that show, how bad, sleep deprivation, all the things
Yeah.
that can cause, right? And some of the stations we have are up many times after midnight, and behavioral health and
Yeah.
wellness and mental health. These are big, big things now, and rightfully so. So, yeah, I mean, at every facet, you look at the apparatus we're driving now, they're bigger than they've ever been. I was out the other day at the academy for the graduation. I'm looking at these engines. You don't even have valves. We used to pull, rods and these
Right.
things. They're all electric.
Yeah.
You're flipping a switch and you're doing these things. I was just at the Metro Chiefs conference in Columbus, Ohio, a few weeks ago, and I'm talking to one of the vendors. I'm like, "Well, what is this product you've got here?" And there was a select number of vendors, and it's a you love this. I don't know how it works, but somebody's driving down the road and they got the music up or they're distracted, whatever it is. Somehow, if the fire engine is coming up behind them, there's a frequency that will lower the
No way.
volume of your freaking radio or
For real.
whatever it is in your car and warn you that you've got a fire engine behind you.
That's awesome, dude.
I'm like, well, how does that work? I mean,
Right.
I don't have the head. That sounds like magic to me. And this
That's
guy
how it
was,
works. That's where I would just be like, it's magic. I don't care.
and this, he's an engineer, so he's talking me through it. And I have no idea what he's saying. I said, well, at the end of the day, he's like, well, does it work? He goes, yeah, no, it works. We're refining it, this and that. And so,
That's crazy.
I'm following up with this guy. We're tracking firefighters has been kind of the holy grail for a long time. If we knew where our firefighters were in a building,
Yeah.
God forbid, there's a mayday and they're trapped, how can we get to them faster? On the wildfire, the wildland fire grounds. This just happens to be, I think, this month or this week, the 10-year anniversary of the Granite Mountain hotshot fatality, where they lost 19 of the 20 firefighters. In fact, tonight I'm going to an anniversary event for it. Well, they were in trouble and there was smoke in the air, and the aircraft with air tankers and everything else didn't know where they were, couldn't find them. you know I watch a lot of TV and movies. I've got a lot of friends that are in the special forces. They seem to be able to track,
Yeah.
soldiers and Marines and whatnot in combat. So why don't we have that? And so there have been several attempts, and I think it's getting better, but we're exploring right now a product that we believe, will track, we can give all of our firefighters on the phones that they've been issued as pagers,
Yeah.
that are intrinsically safe and waterproof that they have with them all the time that we'll be able to track them. The real challenge has been height. You can track where they are, horizontally,
Right.
but the tracking of
Yes, that's
vertical,
true. Which would be unique to the
tough.
fire service because
Yep.
like other places, it's not as big a deal. You just go, I just need your geolocation. But to think about, I need to know where you are with
Yeah.
that too.
Is the firefighter down on the second floor or the fourth floor?
Yeah,
You're going to need some, and so that's always been the ones. Well, that's happening. So us and Philadelphia Fire Department, the commissioner there is a good friend, and they're engaging on this too. So, on the wildfire issue, we established, in fact, the governor, we're handing it over tomorrow, July 1, but we created a program to where we've got two fixed wing aircraft, one in Northern California and Southern California, where upon initial attack, they launch and they've got sensors to where we can map, we can video, we can live stream. And so that and the intent was the people on the ground,
right.
fire's gotten away from them. They know where the fire is, how large it is. And of course, it translates to policymakers, commanders, and so via WhatsApp, because it's simple, right?
Yeah.
There's thousands that can get this on their phone instantaneously.
That's great.
And, like us of short, patience, I can't have a password. I can't have a username when I want to use it. So it answers, and we kept it really simple. What are the three things everybody wants to know, no matter if you're the mayor of San Diego, because he used to want to know every time smoke came up, or a firefighter says, well, you want to know, well, where is the fire?
Right.
Then everybody will ask, well, how big is the fire?
Yeah.
And then the third one is, well, where's the fire going?
Yeah.
Those are the three questions that universally want to know. And so that's what these aircraft do. They very quickly, they're King Air 300s, and they respond right upon initial. And so within, minutes of arriving, they're providing that to everybody's phone and
That's
different
incredible.
views and whatnot. But we told them when we were developing this is it needed to be Dr. Seuss simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
The maps. I have to be able to look at that map and understand it intuitively. If you're giving me some contour map, or you're giving me something that's like,
Right.
what is it? I won't use it.
Yeah.
I've got to sign in every time I want to use it, use a password. Firefighters aren't going to use it.
Right.
I've got to just be able to touch it and go, oh. Or, I don't know if we're just lack the patience, if it's just a public safety thing or whatever, and tomorrow will be the first day we're handing the program over to the state of California. The governor here in California yesterday had a big press conference. He called out Orange County and thanked us, but he's budgeted $36 million for this program.
Oh, this is awesome.
So the state will, because it became more of a state operation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how are you going to explain this day and age when you have an earthquake out here and you got people trapped? I mean, really bad earthquake, but you don't have any intel. Meanwhile, in war theater, right? I mean, they're seeing everything, whether it be predators or manned aircraft, crewed aircraft. Here, so we had to put sensors on that would see through clouds. And so the governor really got that. Not only is this for wildfire, but it's for train derailments, oil slicks, earthquakes. We need, information right now.
Yeah, that instantaneous intel saves lives.
We've got to have
Instead
it.
of going, we'll figure it out. It's like, no, we can now, so we should now know what is it where. And I love the third one, right? Like, where's it going? Like,
Where's
hey,
it going?
I need to not be just tell me where's it headed so that we can get out in front of that thing.
I mean, so this innovation is moving so fast, and I think the conversation that's taking place now, we're talking about uncrewed helicopters dropping water, and
Oh wow.
this technology and stuff exists today. Several years ago, we go, boy, wouldn't it be cool if someday we're going to, well, guess what? It's here.
Yeah.
And what's holding us back and the barriers to it are us.
Yeah.
What I recently presented, because we're working with one of those companies that's doing autonomous Black Hawk helicopters.
Yeah.
And I asked the audience, I says, so how would everybody feel here if, you're about ready to fly, wherever you're going to fly, you're on the airplane, you're ready to go, and the, flight attendant comes out and say, hey, we've had a little bit of a change. The pilot and co-pilot weren't able to get here, but it's okay. This airplane is designed to fly autonomously. We're going to continue on the trip, but there's not going to be a pilot or a co-pilot. How would you feel about that? And everybody's like, ooh, that makes me a little uncomfortable, right? Or it's some flat out, oh, I'm getting off.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, guess what? These airplanes can do this anyway.
I would say they do it already, right? They're already
They do it already.
People in a seat.
I mean, the technology is there.
Yeah.
but our reluctance to embrace it or whatever, and I get it. I mean, I'm human too. I don't know that I'd feel comfortable. I'm not saying
Right.
I feel comfortable with that. I'm not there yet, but we're no longer waiting for it. It's here, and
Yeah.
we cannot keep pace. The acceptance of it, we're being outpaced by it, and so we need to catch up in our acceptance
Yeah,
of.
I had a chief recently tell me about all the possible innovations around AI within the fire service, and I thought I don't even think I would have ever connected the two
Yeah,
concepts. Where he's going, hey, if AI is impacting these other areas, I want to know what it can do for us too.
yeah,
I thought, man, it's probably endless. What and putting in the right things, like this is where
sure.
we do it, and this is where AI is going to do it. But fascinating stuff, man.
Well, these young folks, they're way ahead of us in many ways too.
Yeah,
We're one of the big challenges being talked about a lot, within the fire service, these generational differences.
yeah,
And, there's always been generational differences. When I came in, these are, the captains were Korean War,
yep,
era, and we were paramedics were like, they didn't want anything to do with that. And now, my kids, I've got a 36-year-old, a 30-year-old, and a 22-year-old. And many of them grew up with the technology in their hands, and it doesn't make it worse or bad. It's just we've had to find different ways here even to communicate, because I've got 35, 40-year
oh
firefighters, and
yeah.
I've got new firefighters. So we do podcasts, we do paper,
We
we
laugh
do
because
videos.
my kids are 21, 24, and 25. And I grew up when the phone rang, you got excited. So you ran to it because you were going to pick it up and go, hey, who's it for? Maybe it's for me. If one of my kids' phones ring, they get stressed. They're like, text me. They're like, don't call me. Why are you calling me? Nobody calls anybody, text me. And so I remember leading organizations going, my 50, 60 year olds, they probably want a phone call. If I text them, they feel like I don't care. If I'm calling a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old, they're like, no, I'm not answering that phone. And so as a good leader, just going, hey, different people need different things. And you can't just, as much as it'd be nice to have one thing that does it
Yeah,
all, it just doesn't work that way.
it'll work. Well, let me ask you this. So, um, I've kind of, I won't, I'm not afraid to say how old I am. I'll be 64 soon. I figure I'm going to continue for another at least 5 years. I just love the fire service and firefighters, but started in 1978. And, now, our media services folks, our corporate communications folks are like, look, if you're going to do a video, whatever it is, it needs to be short, needs to
Yeah.
be more than 2 or 3 minutes of this. And the attention span, and they've got all the analytics and whatever. Well, I find I'm the same way. If I'm
Yeah.
watching something, it's like after 2 minutes or something, I've kind of
Yep.
digressed down to where the younger generation is. I don't want to sit in front of a 20-minute video. I don't
Yep.
have time for that. Give it to
Dude, I
me in
used to
3 minutes.
preach, and what I learned about preaching, because I would try to investigate, because I want to make sure people are having a good time and they're listening and they're engaged. And commercial breaks was one of the things that I realized is I think at the time that I was reading it, commercial breaks happen every 6.5 to 7 minutes, and so they said that's because of the attention span. They explained the whole thing. Well, I realized if I'm standing on a stage and I'm talking, I have to have some kind of a verbal mental break for them every about 6, 7 minutes, or they're like, man, I lost you. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
what you said. And so I started figuring out, hey, when do I add an illustration? When do I add a quote? When do I make a joke? And I think, I tried to start figuring out patterning, because you can say brilliant things, but if you're not patterned right, they're not hearing it. And that was a tough one for me, because I thought, hey, brilliant thought should carry for an hour and a half. And I did the same thing you did. I went, but how do I listen? Well, I don't listen to someone go on for an hour and a half. Like for me, I need breaks. And so I had to start learning how to put those breaks in as a public speaker. But I watch my kids, man, TikTok videos, 2, 3 minutes. If it's longer than three, you know what? I'm not doing it. And I'm like, oh man, it's a whole different delivery system now.
Well, I learned something just now, so that you're right. Is all the presenting, that's good to know. So I'm taking this away, but you're right. Whether it's a joke, whether it's something every 6 minutes,
Man, a
if
question.
I don't want to say you've lost them, but when they start going for that's how I judge now. If I
Yeah,
sit in the back of a classroom or whatever, somebody's presenting or somebody I know, it's like, hey man, nobody even went to their phone.
yeah,
That's like, oh man, that was a great presentation,
yeah,
right? Because I find myself too, right? It's like, especially in a big, if it's a presentation of a slide, if it's a meeting, I'll never do it because I think it's just
right.
inconsiderate. But that's the jet. If everybody's on their or going to their phones, you're losing them or you lost them,
Oh yeah.
right?
We had a rule on one of the teams that I was leading. because of the phone laptop thing was when you went to the meeting, you had to put your phone in a basket outside. And I told him, I said, if your phone's on you and it rings in the meeting, then we did all these follow up calls. And I said, then you're going to stay late and do 30 minutes of follow up calls. So I go into the meeting and I'm leading it. And one of these knuckleheads outside the meeting decides, hey, I know Mike's got his phone in his pocket. So he texts me. So my phone goes off. And being an authentic leader, they all look at me and they go, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm staying 30 minutes after work today, man, because I
That's
should have the
awesome.
basket.
That guy'd be a perfect firefighter. Always
I'm
trying to.
telling you, right? And then I go out and they're all laughing at me, and I'm like, okay, I got you.
Yeah. Oh, everybody likes the tricks. That's why another reason I love the fire service so much. Everybody's just playing.
Dude, the
You
sense of
know,
humor, the stories are amazing.
too often, I think, again, in trying to keep it simple, I just addressed, I don't know, a bunch of recruits that we promoted last week. And so I get some one-on-one time with them. I push everybody out so we can have some time and they
Yep.
don't feel like they're instructors. And the last thing I generally leave them with is like, man, what you got to remember is this job is fun. This job has been the most fun I've ever had at work was at a fire station with my friends. We're running medical calls, right? We're running at the park, we're cooking, we're shopping. I mean, it is the most fun a human can have. And we don't talk about that enough.
See, and I think that's the piece missing in wellness right now. Like, I love that we're talking about mental health and rest and sleep hygiene. I love all that stuff. The one thing I do think is missing is the piece that you're talking about right there is reminding firefighters, cops, other people, this is amazing. This
Yeah.
experience, this job, this community, because we go so far and here's all the problems you're going to have. Here's all the things you need to deal with your problems. And I get it. Like, I even have a tool I'm working on to go, hey, this is a personal plan for a trauma when you encounter it, get all that. But I think sometimes, man, just talk about, hey, you're going to get to run into a building that's on fire. And for some of you, that's going to be the highlight of your life. You're going to get to rappel like on the job. You're paid to rappel. Like, I think we forget to talk about the joy of some of that stuff.
I totally agree. And it's important. And it's the old wow, it's never any fun anymore. That's when I'll quit. Well, as you move up, you get satisfaction in different ways. It was hard promoting, from the ground to a battalion. Now I'm outside the building. I'm looking at it and reading smoke and doing all the things I need to do to support the firefighters in it. And when you first make that transition, you miss it, right?
Yeah.
Then as you move up and no longer you even doing that, you're taking satisfaction in what you're seeing on TV, how your crews did. And so it just becomes a different level of fun or satisfaction. But
I think that's where a good leader is when you can take joy in what you're equipping and empowering other people to get to do. That's sacrificial leadership. Because I know some guys, right? It's like, well, I want to do it. I think there's a certain generosity in going, I'm going to make you able to do it even if I can't. So at the cost of me running into the building, I'm going to help you do it well. I think that's great leadership.
I get great joy out of seeing my people do good. And sometimes it's on TV, on the news. I mean, we're on
Yeah.
the news every night for something, right? And lately, it's we're even about to establish, other than the usual awards where guys did heroic stuff, and
Right.
our firefighters have done this, but we're calling it above and beyond. But we're seeing all of these amazing things done, and firefighters, you won't know about it because they won't tell you that they
Right.
do these things, right? They mowed the lawn for the elderly person they took to the hospital. We had one a while back where the single elderly female, husband had passed years ago, lived in a big house by herself, no family, blah blah blah, fell and hit her head, and our folks arrived. They made entry and took her to the hospital, but on the floor, on the hardwood floors, there was a large puddle of blood. Well, they did what they did. They took her to the hospital. They came back
Yeah.
and made entry again and cleaned it up because they didn't want her coming home
Yep.
and having to deal with this. Well, nobody told them to do that. No, we don't train them to do that. This is just, a unique, and we're seeing it all the time now.
Yeah.
It's turned into a case where I used to get, calls or emails with complaints, and that's not a lot of them, but you get those. Well, now, the stories, one short one. So I had somebody call me, this daughter of this elderly gentleman. I guess they were having a family party or whatever, and she called to thank me for the engine crew that responded to their family birthday party, house, whatever. Apparently, her father had had cardiac arrest during the party. And of course, we showed up and we provided care and took him to the hospital and all this. And so she wanted to thank us. I said, well, how's your father doing? She goes, well, sadly, he passed. I went, oh, I mean, I was like, ooh, I didn't know that was like the story. She goes, but the way that your people treated our family with dignity, and the captain pulled us aside and this and that. So here, I just after I was like, here's somebody who lost their
Yeah.
father, and she's calling me to thank me.
Yeah.
Dude, that's like, oh man,
Well,
these guys.
that's when you know you're hitting home runs with the culture. You're like,
Yeah.
they didn't just do their job; they did it so well that somebody else is like, I had this massive loss, and one of the things I remember is how I was treated. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tell people often in private venues, I mean, there's three things people expect when they call 911. Everybody, they expect you to get there quickly.
Yep.
And for the most, we have performance measures and, how many minutes, what percent of the time, and that's how we do station spacing. So we have performance metrics and we do that very well. Although if it's your emergency, it's never fast enough, right?
Right.
And they expect us to know what we're doing when we get there.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of an expectation. You showed up good, but do you know what you're doing? And we do. And even if we didn't, they probably wouldn't know, most people, but they do. I mean, we invest a lot of training and equipment, and so we do. And the third thing they expect, but they don't really think about, is being treated, respectfully and with dignity.
Yeah.
You just go, well, yeah, duh, obvious.
Yeah.
But that's not something that happens consistently enough.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's just what you said, Michael. That's the phone call I get. It's not about, wow, thanks for showing up so quickly. Thanks for knowing what you're doing. It's the thanks for how your people treated my family, in their worst day, the dignity, the respect. That's what they remember. They don't remember whether we know, whether we got there fast or not.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to honor your time. I could literally, Brian, sit here for 3 hours and talk to
I'm
you.
enjoying it too. I've always enjoyed our conversations.
So let's do this right before we close. So we'll do two things. One, I'm asking you this question, and then at the end, I'm just going to give you a couple minutes. You can say whatever you want. We were just talking about this before we started the phone call recording. What are a couple crossover things you see in the fire service that may have value outside the fire service, strategy wise, leadership wise? What are things you see that you go, hey, I think these things could work in an organization that you guys have learned within the fire service?
I think, and we did talk about it a little bit earlier. I talk a lot about MDC or mission driven culture, right? And whether your mission is public safety or, it could be selling whatever it is, whatever your business is, especially with a startup or even a company that's been around a long time, we talk a lot about a high trust state and, pursuit of truth and trusting your folks and those sorts of things. But it's really hard to let go, right?
Yeah.
And so I think just by nature, it's not always micromanagement, but it's not really allowing your people, I was once told, it made a lot of sense to me. It's like, delegate to the point of uncomfortability.
Yeah.
And I remind myself that, right? Whether it's my direct, reports or below that, is what is that level of uncomfortability, right? And that's hard. That's hard as leaders to do. But I think 9 times out of 10, they may, your subordinates or others may choose a path that's different than what you and I would choose, Mike. But it's not necessarily wrong. And in many cases, it's better.
Yeah.
That is hard. And I think if all the employees understand what the mission is, and we've given them good leaders' intent, task purpose, they understand why they're doing it. And that's what drives, I think, the younger generation crazy. And not so much us. You and I grew up in an era where you told us what to do.
You did it.
And you did it. You didn't ask questions. Hey, if I wanted you to know, I'd know. You just need it.
Yeah.
Now they want to know.
Yeah.
When you ask yourself, and so that irritates people. And it always boggles me. So, well, why does that irritate you? I mean,
you know what irritates us? I'll tell you why it irritates us, because most of us leading don't know the why. So when they ask us the why, it reveals, crap, I don't know why we're doing it. But that's our shield. So I grew up with, my dad would say, when I say jump, you say how high. When I say run, you say how fast. And I realized in me, when I started leading, the reason that question makes me uncomfortable is it's not set up enough in my head and heart yet, and it exposes that. That's why we have a problem with it.
I know. And so, the initial is, well, how dare you? Well, hey, is there a problem with them knowing why? So we
Yeah,
talk a lot about task, purpose, and end state. Here's what I need you to do. And sometimes on the fire ground and others, we don't always have the luxury of time to tell you, look, I need you to put the hole in the top of the roof because that's part of our doctrine. You've been trained. You should know that.
yeah,
Afterwards, we can explain why I asked you to do something different. But, what is that end state and working it backwards, right? Well, I mean, hey, in the end, this is what I need it to look like.
right.
How you get there, as long as it's legal, not illegal, not immoral, not
Right.
unethical,
But
but this is the
and
end
part
state.
of it though, as you talk about it, it's training beforehand. So it's that investment beforehand. But I love this principle because I think if I'm running a Fortune 500 company and I'm like, oh, this is a big deal. Hey, listen, if you can do this on a fire scene, then it's safe enough to do in a business. And that's some of the crossover I think for some of the fire leadership that you guys have is you guys have made decisions based on like survivability of life. And if corporate America can take some of those lessons and go, hey, we're talking dollars and cents, we're not talking about bodies, then we can take some things you guys have refined and figured out, hey, you can't adjust here, but you can adjust there. Those things can have massive crossover impact. That's why I'm hoping that exposing more leaders like you, that other people in other industries will reach out to you guys and go, hey, teach me what you know, because I think there's a way of leading that you guys have tested that would be amazing to see outside in other industries.
Well, and I think there is, and you use the word crossover. I love that word because, what is it that we can grab from business? The
Yeah.
books I read or listen to now, I used to have more time to read unless I'm on an airplane, aren't fire books, aren't this and that. It's other leaders, and some of them are
Yeah.
business folks, Walsh. And I mean, there's a variety of
Yeah.
different things, General McChrystal. I mean, there's a lot of really good things. But the crossover there, one of the things that we've really taken note of, I think, in the fire service are the companies, the businesses out there that are hiring diverse, not just workforces, but executives
Yes.
because of the different, the way they think differently and
Yeah.
everything else. And in business, what I'm understanding is business is benefiting, those companies are benefiting from these very diverse approaches, mindsets that you can only get by well, we need that too, and we're really trying to encourage more females to consider the fire service as a
Yeah.
career.
They bring a different perspective in, Jim,
And I've seen it.
which is
I had
absolutely
a female partner back in San Diego, and what she may have lacked in bulk or brute strength, she more than overcame in her approach, in medical aids, and it was and she wasn't of large stature, but she knew how to position herself. It was all technique.
yeah.
Man, we were on a call where there was a tragedy or something. The family wasn't necessarily coming to me. They were leaning on her sometimes. Or, and what I share with people, we're driving back from a very horrific incident or a fire, or whatever, and you're on a crew that's very diverse. You get those different, opinions or perspectives. And one of the things that's been a challenge, because we use the word diversity or something like that, and everybody defaults to
Right.
affirmative action and lowering of standards and all these things. And I have to go out and educate our firefighters sometimes at the fire station and say, no, look, let me tell you a story, and I'll tell a story about a response. And now, have you guys ever responded back from a fire and so and so is talking about their experience, and then somebody else is, and you think to yourself, wow, were we on the same incident?
Right. Right.
That's a different, or that's a little odd or whatever. And we just go about, that's diversity. And so when you explain it to people, they go, or give different stories, they go, well, that's not so bad. It's like,
And when I think of
no.
diversity, I go, listen, if I'm making a diversity hire, I want to be because of honor and value, not because of obligation. And I think and you talk about it, right? We hear diversity, people hear obligation, and then they get all tense. Like, no,
Yeah,
listen, the way we ought to look at that is I want a variety of perspective. I want a variety of skills. I want a variety of, I do want someone who can't brute strength their way through it because they're going to teach us a way to do it when we don't have the brute strength.
that's right.
Those type of, when we see diversity that way, man, I think it makes us so good. When we do it by obligation, I think that's where everybody, even those being hired in those diversity situations, feel dishonored because they're like, don't hire me because I'm a fill in the blank.
Yeah,
Hire me because you want my
exactly.
perspective.
Exactly. And I think, at least from what I understand, is a lot of the companies that are very successful out there have recognized that,
Yeah.
and are, benefiting financially and otherwise, right?
Oh,
And so
absolutely.
what are
Yeah.
those
Broad
lessons that
perspective
we
is a value add. You get a good perspective, man. That's a massive value add.
So I think there's a lot we too, fire chiefs
Yeah.
can learn from the business community, in that, as you call it, crossover. So yeah, I think, leaders of large organizations, we, of course, the fire service and law enforcement, we have those conversations, but we don't generally sit in audiences with, or in groups of people that are leaders of large organizations or even small organizations, whatever they're, diverse organizations,
Yeah.
and have those conversations. And I think that'll be one of my takeaways from this, Michael, is maybe that's something we within the fire service ought to encourage, and maybe that's something you can help broker at some point.
Yeah, I hope so, man. When I think of like fire chiefs, I always think, man, they have so much to offer. There's other people out there who can bless them and help them. We just got to figure out how to get them all together. As we figure out how to get those people together, man, I think it just makes everybody better.
I'd be fascinated by that, because you're right. I'm betting we, the fire chiefs, are missing some really good leadership lessons by listening to successful, business leaders.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. You can say whatever you want. So 2 minutes, you can, I mean, shoot, knock yourself out. I don't care what it is, any topic, anything, and then we'll end.
Hey, Michael, thank you. I don't know that I have 2, 3 minutes to say about anything, but I've enjoyed the conversation, not just today, but certainly those we've had before. And I admire you for your passion for this, and passion for service. And, I think I do a lot more reflecting again as I'm into the twilight of my career. And I think too often, I've got so many friends that have retired, and, it's the one thing we hear, whether it's public service or anywhere else, is, what do you miss when you see them? Hey, how's it going? Well, I miss the people. I miss the people, but I don't miss the BS. I mean, that typically is the deal. So I told myself a long time, well, not a long time ago, but probably a good 5 years ago, because more and more of the people I came on with the academies, everybody's retiring. It's like, I don't want to do that. I want to, I don't want to miss the people. I want to enjoy them now.
Yeah.
And I want to love the people. I love our firefighters, and you've got to love your people, even when they've done wrong or whatever. You have to love your firefighters. But I want to spend time with people and talk with them and learn more about their family. 10, 20 years ago, I might not have cared that much.
Yeah.
But I realized, that eventually I've got to retire at some point, right? No matter how much I love it, man. At some point, somebody's going to say, Grandpa's got to go. But I want to enjoy it now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the relationships, I think, that have just not only internally, but externally, have become a lot more important.
Yeah.
And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but staying connected and fostering relationships outside the fire service, you get to meet. That's one of the benefits of these jobs. You get to meet some incredible people. I've gotten to meet presidents. I've gotten to meet, the director of the FBI. I mean, you get to meet some I got to throw out the first pitch at a Major League Baseball game in my uniform and in my
Did you make it?
boots.
So did you get it all the way to the catcher?
I did.
Okay, what's up?
That was a lot of pressure, though. I didn't
Yeah, I
realize
bet.
I didn't realize that was a big thing until like the days, and then I heard all the stories. And listen, you can't bounce it, and you
Yep.
talk about pressure. Then all these
Well,
firefighters,
especially in the fire service, man, you never let that thing down.
oh man. I mean, I had to, but so it's almost like I enjoy. I don't even call it a job, but the people more. I mean,
Yeah.
there's always going to be the unpleasant politics or the human resources thing, or there's always going to be those things. But I don't want to be one of those that looks back and says, man, I didn't take advantage of, the relationships. I've gotten to go to staff rides in Gettysburg. We're doing one in Selma, I mean, I don't know that I've had all these opportunities, otherwise. And so I think we're blessed. And
these are the moments, right? Like, don't miss the moments that are right in front of you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to suck the juice out of every one of them.
It's a privilege, right? To be in these positions, to be a leader in anything. You don't have to have rank, or you can be a leader as a firefighter. I mean, it has nothing to do with rank or stature or any of that, but it's a privilege, to know that you've got influence, and good influence, positive influence on others. So, I could visit a lot of fire stations. Whenever I see them, I walk by them, I talk, and I may not even know them or I recognize them as, hey, how's a family, this and that. And it's genuine. And
Yeah.
I think I'll leave it with that is when I get asked, about leadership, what are those things? I say the key for me has always been be yourself, be
Yeah.
genuine,
Yeah.
right? Be humble, have a little humility because ego, you nailed it earlier. Ego is a killer.
Oh,
We as firefighters, man, we're watching. When you get promoted, we're watching you. And if you act a little bit different or more smart than maybe, oh, I knew it. Did you see
yeah.
that? They are watching. So if you're not being genuine, you can't keep it up forever.
No, you'll forget. You'll forget what you were pretending at.
You'll slip.
Yep.
If you're running that red light, you tell people not to do this, but you park your car where you shouldn't or whatever.
Nope.
I mean, you need to really think about, if you want to be an executive leader, that you're going to be honest, you're going to be watched. And if you're doing things because you don't want to be caught, maybe that's not the right position. But I
Yeah, I agree.
think being genuine, and people will tell you they come in here and we're in here laughing. And they're like, the chief was like that. Well, yeah, why wouldn't I be?
Yep, I agree.
And just the humility. It's like, I'm no better or important than anybody else in this fire department. My badge says chief, so I've got this list of responsibilities
That's
and
right. I just got more
obligations I
stuff to
have.
do.
When I was a firefighter, the list was this, and so
Yeah,
now it's this. And so
that's a great perspective, though, Brian. I love that. Like your position just tells you what you're responsible for, not what your value is.
I'm no,
Has
hey, I'm no
zero amount
smart.
of value.
I'm no smarter. I'm not saying, well, maybe, just from lessons learned. But I was one of those kids, and maybe you were too, where my brothers weren't like this. I was the black sheep. Don't do this because if you do, this will happen. And they wouldn't do it. Well, I had to do it.
You're
And
a
guess what?
scientist. You got to prove it. You got to do
Yeah.
the investigation.
And they were right. If you
I
do
would.
that,
I'll
that
tell
will
you this.
happen.
This was so bad. So I think people that are listening know I was a pastor for about 30 years, but I was probably about 7 years into it. My mom and dad were still alive, and my mom ran into our old babysitter, and the babysitter was asking, well, how's Stacy? That's my older sister, and she's like, oh, she's a child therapist right now. And she's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And how's Will? Well, Will's a fire chief now, or I guess at the time he was a captain. He's a captain on the fire. Oh yeah, that makes sense. How's Mike? And she's like, well, he's a pastor. And she goes, no, no, really. Like, did he end up in prison? Like, like, what happened to him? And she's like, no, really. Like, he works in churches. And so, yeah, you talk about growing up as the guy that was like, don't do it. I got to try it. It was me to the degree that my babysitter was convinced I was in prison somewhere.
I love that. Well, even today, I'll run into friends from years ago and they're like, dude, I saw you on TV. It's like, what? I mean, I can't believe it's like, man, I can't believe it either.
That's right.
I tell people they just don't do good background checks here. But I love it. My parents passed a number of years ago. I think because they probably lost a lot of sleep, with me
Right.
as a kid. And before they both passed, I think I was a captain in the battalion. So they were, very proud of that. And, I kind of regret, not having been, it is what it is, right? You look
Oh,
back
yeah.
when you're mature and go, gosh, I put them through a lot. At the time, it doesn't seem like that. But
Yeah.
I think many people deserve a second chance. I certainly was given
Yeah.
probably more than a second chance on multiple occasions that by people that I don't know saw something in me that I didn't,
Yeah.
and I'm really grateful for that. And
Well, what I love is your gratitude causes you to see that for others, though, right? Like, so where you can't go back and go, I'd give this to my mom and dad. What I love is go, but who could I give it to? That's
yeah,
the beauty, man.
it is, and I've given, and in these positions, I'll end with this: is you have the authority to do some things. So I've had some people come in that have had drinking issues or other things, and they seemed sincere, and they were taking where the rules and the policy might have had them. And if I've had HR say, look, chief, giving them a second chance, it's a bad idea. And I've taken second chances on
Yeah.
them. And they've been successful. On a very rare case, are they not? I had a kid while I was down in San Diego last week for a memorial service, a fallen firefighter. I had a guy come up to me and I recognized him, but couldn't put it together, right? And he's like, look, I just want to say thank you. I've been sober now for 8 years. I'm married. I got 2 kids. And I said, remind me of your name? And he told me his name. I was like, oh man, that was the kid that everybody wanted fired. And I said, no, we're going to give
Yeah.
this kid a second chance. And so sometimes you get burned, but,
I would rather get burned sometimes than be perfectly for never getting burned and
Yeah,
never having anybody that ever got a second chance. I don't want to be batting 1,000 on never making a mistake.
it's the old, remember where you came from, and that I wasn't a perfect,
Right?
person or employee. I mean, I worked hard. I did all this. I was probably a pretty good employee, but I made a lot of mistakes,
Yeah.
before that. And I go back to, I think jail was a legitimate option at one point.
Right.
My life was not going in the right direction. So that I think the fire service genuinely saved my life. But if others hadn't given me chances and opportunities when they didn't have to,
Yep.
so it's great to be in a position to be able to do those things for others.
I think it's awesome.
So thank you, Michael. I appreciate
Yeah,
the opportunity.
absolutely, buddy. Thank you so much for doing this. We'll do it again some other time because I mean I keep talking to you forever.
Yeah, likewise. I
All right,
appreciate it.
God
We'll
bless.
meet. I'll give you a shout when I end up out that way. And listen, if you're busy in the academy and all that, don't that's your focus.
Sounds good, buddy.